Congratulations, you have purchased the Audible audiobook version of Gert, The Unauthorised History of Australia, Volume 1, Megafauna to Macquarie. This marks you as a lady or gentleman of taste and distinction. Or maybe you have downloaded a pirated version, which marks you as a black-hearted, bottom-feeding brigand who forces hard-working writers to live in cardboard boxes and become exotic dancers. Bad things happen to pirates, as you will discover if you continue listening to this excellent book. Except for those pirates who cruise the Caribbean drinking delicious rum cocktails and go on to write best-selling travel books about Australia. They have a bloody good life. My name is David Hunt and I wrote the book you're about to listen to. It is an Australian history book, but you can't understand Australia's early colonial past, the main focus of Gert, without understanding what was going down in the United Kingdom of Great Britain, United States of America, disunited Ireland, and cowardly and treacherous France, just to name drop a few of the scenic locations that feature prominently in Gert. To any French people who are listening, I can assure you that no French people were harmed during the writing of this book. And if any Irish people were harmed, they did it to themselves. There is a common misperception that Australia has the world's most boring history. I certainly felt that way studying Australian history at school. It seemed to be all about small-time crooks, sheep, gold diggers, sheep, directionally challenged explorers leaving little dotted lines on maps, and more sheep. Nothing could be further from the truth. Australia has over 60,000 years of rich and compelling history. Much of it is absurd, some of it is tragic, a surprisingly large amount of it is obscene, but all of it is wonderful. I'd like to share a few quotes that convey what Gert is all about. In 1897, Mark Twain wrote, in Following the Equator, "Australian history is almost always picturesque. Indeed, it is so curious and strange that it is itself the chiefest novelty the country has to offer, and so pushes the other novelties into second and third place. It does not read like history, but like the most beautiful lies, and all of a fresh new sort, no mouldy old stale ones. It is full of surprises and adventures, and incongruities and contradictions and incredibilities. But they are all true. They all happened." Twain, the 19th century's greatest satirist, understood that Australian history and humour were a potent mix, and I hope that this book, in some small way, does Twain's words justice. In 1697, the great French Enlightenment scholar Pierre Bayle wrote, "If an historian were to relate truthfully all the crimes, weaknesses and disorders of mankind, his readers would take his work for satire rather than for history." Australian history, thankfully, is chocked to the gills with crime, weakness and disorder. But while Gert satirises Australian identity, it is first and foremost an Australian history. The words that best sum up Gert, however, were spoken by America's greatest moral philosopher in 1991. It's funny because it's true. Thank you, Homer Simpson. Before we get started, let's go through a few housekeeping matters. This is a complete and unabridged version of Gert, except for the incomplete abridged bits. There are no illustrations in this audiobook for reasons that I hope are obvious to you. If not, please stop listening now and buy something by Dan Brown instead. I've also omitted the acknowledgements because the book ends on what I'd like to think is a high note, and you should not then be forced to listen to lots of boring thank yous to people you've never met. There are, however, footnotes. Lots of footnotes. The footnotes give me an opportunity to talk about coconuts, IKEA, Irish boy bands, tobacco enemas and Star Trek, which are all essential to a proper understanding of Australian history. Each footnote will be preceded by what the technical boffins reliably inform me is something called an audio cue. That is the last sound that convicts, sailors and British public school boys and Tory MPs heard just before being given a good hard flogging. Flogging was a popular punishment in the convict colony of New South Wales and in the Royal Navy, whose office administered the colony for the first 2 decades of settlement. Flogging was also incredibly popular in Mother Britain, where members of the public liked to enjoy a good Sunday out, watching some poor turnip thief being stripped naked, tied to the back of a cart and whipped within an inch of his life. The British also popularised being manacled and chained, gagged with a wooden block, and being forced to wear an iron mask and or shoes with spikes on the inside. all very 50 Shades of Earl Grey. So the sound of the lash seems an appropriate means of jolting you out of the main narrative and introducing you to the sort of trivial diversions that history is all about. The audiobook contains 10 chapters and an intermission, during which I encourage you to roll Jaffas down the aisle. For any non-Australians or New Zealanders listening to this, a Jaffa is a hard candy and chocolate ball that was traditionally rolled down a cinema's wooden aisle to make a noise designed to irritate other patrons. Each chapter contains an introductory quote and chapter subheadings, which I will read in a suitably sonorous tone so you know we're moving on to a new theme or sub-story. Anyway, I'm sure you'll get the hang of it, so I think we're just about ready. Ma. Seashells, seashells by the seashore. Two. Right, here we go. Introduction. Our home is girt by sea. Advance Australia Fair, Peter Dodds McCormick, 1878. Girt. No word could better capture the essence of Australia. Switzerland, Paraguay and Burkina Faso are merely girt by other countries, but Australia is entirely and defiantly girt by sea. No other nation can rival Australia for sheer maritime girtitude. Australia dwarfs its nearest rival Greenland by a girt factor of 3.52. 7,617,930 square kilometres to Greenland's puny 2,166,086 square kilometres. And Greenland isn't even a proper country, just a forlorn Danish outpost that reeks of pickled herring. Australia justifiably celebrates its girtuosity in its national anthem, for the history of this wide brown land has been shaped by the even wider blue seas in which it rests. It was the warm currents of the Timor Sea that carried the first Australians to these shores. And it was Australia's phenomenal girtage that kept these hardy pioneers blissfully unaware of trousers, smallpox, large mining companies, Shane Warne and the other trappings of Western civilization for tens of millennia. It was the vast reaches of the Pacific and Indian Oceans that led Europe's greatest minds to conclude that so much water must be girting something. For surely the world would tip from its axis in the absence of a great southern land to balance the sprawling continents of the northern hemisphere. It was those same dark, churning waters that led the captains of Europe's finest fleets, searching in vain for the elusive southern continent, to ask, "So where the bloody hell are you?" But Terra Australis could not remain incognita forever. The veil of waters parted for Willem Jansoon, Abel Tasman, William Dampier, James Cook, Matthew Flinders and Jessica Watson, revealing a land of golden beaches, storm-kissed bays and jewelled harbours. And while the world's other great powers saw Australia's unparalleled girtedness as an excellent reason to steer clear of the joint, Britain saw it as a virtue, for it needed a place to stash all its pickpockets, sheep thieves and Irishmen. Britain fervently hoped that the tyranny of distance and the despotism of lots of water would prevent its undesirables from walking back to London. Australia's isolation made it a giant petri dish, able to grow a unique culture. It attracted no-hopers, ne'er-do-wells, political prisoners, religious refugees, free-thinkers and eccentrics. It drew adventurers and risk-takers and called to the poor, the disadvantaged and the merely socially embarrassing. It served as a bright beacon to a tsunami of opportunists, gamblers, entrepreneurs and glad-handers. Australian ports provided a gateway for sailors and fortune seekers from all corners of the globe. And the lure of riches, or men with big sticks, carried the Chinese and Kanaks to our shores. Australia was the place to be, unless you were black, or a woman, or gay, or suspected of being Irish, or even worse, all of the above. Yet geography, economy and necessity forced Australia's disparate peoples into contact with each other, elevating men of low birth to greatness and lowering a fair share of the mighty. Rich and poor, black and white, gay and straight, Catholic and Protestant and Jew were left to simmer in the cultural melting pot. In time, a new and distinct people emerged from Britain's colonial kitchen. A people who bathed regularly, a people who liked a bet, a drink and a smoke, a people who were good at bull games, a people who fought and died for whatever Britain or America wanted them to fight and die for, and who laughed in the face of Johnny Turk, Uncle Tojo, and anyone else who looked or spoke funny. A people who would push technology to its very limits, gifting humanity with the finest lawnmowers and clotheslines the world had ever seen, and a strange brown paste that could transform a simple piece of toast into a simple piece of toast covered in a strange brown paste. A people who called themselves Australians. While our identity evolved, the sea remained a constant. The first three governors of New South Wales were all naval men, which explains why rum, sodomy and the lash have played such an important role in Australian life. Sir Henry Parkes, the man who led the fight for an independent Australia and a poet of outstanding mediocrity, wrote in 1889, "God girdled our majestic isle with seas far-reaching east and west, that man might live beneath this smile in peace and freedom ever blessed." Alfred Deakin, Australia's second Prime Minister, finished his great 1898 speech in support of Australian Federation with the words, "For God has made her one, complete she lies, within the unbroken circle of the skies, and round her indivisible the sea breaks on her single shore." Deakin wasn't going to let Tasmania get in the way of a good speech. Robert Menzies yearned for the love of a blue-hatted woman who lived far over the sea. Malcolm Fraser lost his trousers on the other side of the sea. John Howard and Julia Gillard told people to go back across the sea. And Harold Holt, our greatest submaritime politician, has been girt by sea since 1967. This is the story of a land and a people who always have been and always will be girt. This is the story of us.